Welcome back to A Rose Within the Thorns, the vodcast where we discover the beauty within powerful literature and explore how stories help us connect, reflect, and grow. In episode 4, we will be delving into one of the most emotionally shattering chapters in Elie Wiesel's memoir. Section 4 captures the slow death of innocence, the corruption of values, and the final fracture of faith. It's here that the question is asked, where is God now? And the answer, hanging from this gallows. Eliezer and his father arrive at Buna and are assigned to a relatively safe commando, working in the electrical parts warehouse. They are housed in the musician's block, where Eliezer meets Juliet, Yossi, and Tibi, fellow prisoners who offer a glimmer of connection and hope. Together, they dream of escape, of Palestine, and of survival. But these small comforts are fleeting. A dentist tries to extract Eliezer's gold crown. Eliezer manages to delay it, only for the dentist to be hanged for corruption. The value of a human life is now a bowl of soup or a rusty spoon. As days go by, Eliezer experiences random violence. He's beatenly savaged by Idek. His father is beaten too, and Eliezer, in a heartbreaking moment of self-awareness, feels anger not at the perpetrator, but at his father's helplessness. The dehumanization has begun to change him. The section ends with two public hangings, one of a man who stole during an air raid, and another of a child, a Papel, whose angelic face stuns even the most jaded prisoners. As the boy dies slowly before their eyes, someone whispers, "Where is God?" And Eliezer answers, "Here he is, hanging on the gallows." Our theme talk today has 4 sub-themes. Our first is the death of innocence and the erosion of faith. In this section, Wiesel stages one of the most iconic and emotionally devastating spiritual crises in Holocaust literature, the hanging of the child, a Papel with the face of an angel. It's not just a tragic death, it becomes the symbolic execution of God, and with him, the innocence and religious certainty that Eliezer once clung to. When a prisoner asks, "Where is God now?" Eliezer does not offer comfort or scripture. He responds from within himself. Where is he? This is where, hanging from this gallows. This moment is a direct rejection of the cultural and religious assumption that suffering is a test of faith, or that divine justice will eventually prevail. Wiesel deliberately undermines the redemptive arc that permeates many religious narratives. Instead, he offers a blasphemous yet necessary metaphor that positions God not as a savior, but as a victim, powerless, silent, and dying alongside the innocent. The fact that this realization is delivered in internal monologue rather than exposition reflects Wiesel's intent to explore the internal collapse of belief. The aesthetic shift from observation to introspection mirrors Eliezer's journey from external endurance to spiritual disintegration. Readers are invited not simply to mourn the child, but to grapple with the unsettling idea that some experiences are so horrifying they can murder not only people, but meaning itself. Faith is no longer lost in a single moment. It dissolves quietly, painfully, in the background of sustained horror. Our next sub-theme is power, corruption, and the dehumanization of relationships. Wiesel does not limit his critique of violence to the SS guards. Instead, he presents a layered representation of moral corruption under authoritarian pressure, showing how systems of terror do not hurt from just the outside. They hollow out the inside. Idek and Frank, Jewish inmates, hold minor positions of power, but become sadistic in their treatment of fellow prisoners. They are both victims and perpetrators, embodiments of complicity and cruelty intertwined. This inversion of power dynamics corrupts previously sacred relationships. Frank uses Eliezer's love for his father against him, beating the old man to force compliance. Idek whips Eliezer not out of punishment, but out of humiliation and the need to dominate. Here, Wiesel is asking us to consider how oppressive structures manufacture moral failure, and how even the oppressed may be forced into complicity. The traditional Jewish cultural values of respect for elders, compassion, and communal solidarity are systematically eroded. What once bound a community together, language, ritual, and song, is now replaced by silence, survivalism, and betrayal. But Wiesel does not encourage simple condemnation. Rather, he invites readers to adopt a nuanced perspective, one that recognizes that power can corrupt anyone, and that judgment is an impossible luxury in the context of starvation, fear, and constant threat. Our third subtheme is that of guilt, silence, and moral fracture. One of the most confronting elements of this chapter is not the violence itself, but how Eliezer reacts to it. When he sees his father being beaten, he feels anger, not at the abuser, but at the victim. His internal admission, that was what life in a concentration camp had made of me, reveals a profound moral unraveling. This moment is not about blame, it's about the cost of continued existence when survival demands emotional suppression. Wiesel represents silence in two forms: external silence, so that is where the prisoners are conditioned not to speak or act, and internal silence, where conscience is smothered by hunger, fear, and despair. God is silent, yes, but so too is Eliezer. His guilt is not dramatized, it's confessed with chilling restraint. This restraint is echoed in Wiesel's stylistic minimalism: short sentences, understated verbs, and sparse dialogue. The form mirrors the emotional numbness being described. The audience is positioned to experience not just the horrors of violence, but the deeper horror of adaptation to it. By exposing his own inner fractures, Wiesel resists heroic survivor narratives. Instead, he compels us to reflect on the invisible psychological scars of trauma and the moral ambiguity that survivors must live with. Our last subtheme is hope and the human connection amid horror. Within all this darkness, Wiesel includes brief but powerful moments of humanity. When the French girl tends to Eliezer's wounds after he is beaten, her gesture transcends language, race, and fear. She whispers, "Bite your lips, wait, clench your teeth, and wait." Her compassion is both tender and revolutionary, a quiet resistance to brutality through kindness. Later, their improbable reunion in Paris years after the war serves as a surreal epilogue, proof that human connection endures, even if scarred. These moments represent resistance not through action but through empathy. Wiesel places enormous moral value on small gestures: a crust of bread, a comforting word, a hand on the forehead. In doing so, he reaffirms that dignity is not dead, even if it is hiding. These connections also link to broader cultural values of solidarity and care, remnants of the Jewish communal tradition that persists even in fragmented forms. The audience is positioned to recognize that these acts are symbolic, not just sentimental. They offer a sliver of hope, not because they erase suffering, but because they remind us what is still possible within it. We're now going to have a look through some of our quote collections. Where is he? Here he is, hanging here on this gallows. This devastating line marks the collapse of Eliezer's faith and symbolically enacts the murder of God in the moral universe of the Holocaust. The rhetorical structure reflects traditional Jewish questioning: rooted in texts like the Book of Job. But here it finds no redemption. The metaphor is blunt. God is not distant, nor merely silent. He's been executed with the child. By placing this moment with an internal monologue, Wiesel intensifies its emotional impact and forces the reader to experience this collapse from Elieze's perspective. The hanging child, whose innocence represents all that is sacred and pure, becomes a stand in for divine justice itself. Wiesel challenges the audience to consider whether God's silence in the camp is evidence of absence or complicity. And in doing so, he asks them to confront how traditional beliefs falter under atrocity. This is not blasphemy, it's lamentation. Readers are positioned not only as observers of suffering, but as mourners of faith, forced to reckon within a world which even God appears to die. That was what life in a concentration camp had made of me. This moment of personal confession is one of Wiesel's most morally jarring yet honest. It follows Elieze's admission that he felt anger not at Idek for beating his father, but at his father for failing to avoid punishment. The line marks a critical tone shift from earlier sections, and it reflects the internal corrosion caused by systemic brutality. Wiesel acknowledges that the camp hasn't just endured his body, it has reshaped his mind, his instincts, and his relationships. The traditional Jewish value of honoring one's parents, deeply rooted in cultural and religious law, is inverted. Identity is stripped to its core. Emotional responses are reprogrammed by fear and hunger. By openly admitting this shift, Wiesel breaks from heroic survivor tropes and instead offers a raw, fragmented self. The audience is positioned to reflect not on judgment, but on the psychological weight of survival, and to understand that trauma doesn't only happen during violence, it also unfolds in the silence afterward. I was nothing but a body, perhaps even less, a famished stomach. This stark metaphor expresses the total deconstruction of identity and the transformation of Eliezer from a thinking, feeling person into a single biological function: hunger. The simplicity of this syntax mirrors the simplicity of his existence. He no longer sees himself as a human being with values or dreams, only a vessel of need. In Jewish cultural tradition, the self is made up of mind, soul, and body, working in harmony. Here, that harmony is destroyed. There's no spirit, no intellect, only the craving for sustenance. Time is no longer measured by clocks or calendars, but by the moments between meals. Wiesel uses this line to critique a system that is designed to reduce people to instincts, to erase the sacred and replace it with survival. Through such reduction, we are made to confront the Holocaust as not only an act of mass murder, but the intentional dehumanization. Wiesel invites us to feel the erosion of personhood, and in doing so, he preserves the truth of what loss really looks like. Bite your lips, little brother, clench your teeth and wait. Spoken by the French girl after Eliezer is beaten, this line is one of quiet resistance and unexpected solidarity. The use of imperatives, bite, clench, wait, conveys strength through control, a reversal of the powerlessness that dominates the rest of the scene. Though she speaks softly, her words resonate with courage. She risks exposure by revealing her fluency in German, subtly disclosing her hidden Jewish identity. This positions her as a symbol of resistance, not through violence, but through compassion. In a place where violence and silence define your existence, her small act of care becomes radical. She represents a flicker of human dignity within a system engineered to extinguish it. The line also reflects the deeply embedded Jewish value of tikva, or hope. It's reimagined here as endurance. Wiesel uses this moment to remind readers that even in horror, tenderness can survive. We're invited to see that strength doesn't always roar, it can sometimes whisper. We never thought to admire him, poor hero committing suicide for a ration or two of soup. This brutally ironic line follows the death of a man who crawls towards a soup cauldron during an air raid. Wiesel's tone is emotionless, his word choice is deliberate. The man is not praised for bravery, he's pitied, envied, and dismissed. The use of the word hero is laced with sarcasm, undercutting romanticized notions of courage. The cauldron of soup becomes a grotesque altar where desperation is punished by death. In Jewish culture, food is a symbol of life, community, and spiritual celebration. Here, it is shown as bait. This moment highlights how starvation redefines value systems and moral perception. The prisoners are no longer capable of admiration, only survival. Wiesel is not condemning them. He's revealing how trauma reframes judgment. Readers are positioned to see the man's death as both tragic and inevitable. Another example of how dignity is destroyed by need, and how heroism is rendered meaningless when all that matters is not dying. His tongue was still red, his eyes not yet extinguished. This haunting image describes the slow death of the pupil, too light to die quickly during his execution. Wiesel's descriptive focus on the boy's physical state captures the grotesque intersection between innocence and brutality. The red tongue, the open eyes, these are signs that life that linger where death should already be. In traditional Jewish texts, children are symbols of purity, of renewal, and of divine promise. To hang a child publicly is to kill the future. The pupil's prolonged death violates not only the body, but the moral, ethical, and spiritual order of the world. Wiesel refrains from comment. He lets the image speak, trusting its horror to reach the reader unmediated. His restrained, almost journalistic style amplifies the impact. The audience is forced to look, just as the prisoners were, and in doing so, to confront the desecration of innocence. Wiesel does not offer resolution, only witness again. The pupil remains not just a victim, but a symbol of the unbearable cost of forgetting. We're now going to go through our reflective questions. Once again, I encourage you to pause the video on the next slide and have a go answering some of these questions yourself. Our first question: what does the execution of the pupil symbolize in terms of Eliezer's faith and the text's representation of God? The execution of the pupil, a child with the face of a sad-eyed angel, is one of the most symbolic and devastating moments in Night. The boy's prolonged, agonizing death, where he hangs alive for over 30 minutes, becomes a metaphor for the slow and agonizing death of Eliezer's faith. When a voice asks, "Where is God now?" Eliezer answers internally, "Here he is, hanging here on this gallows." Through this response, Wiesel aligns God with the victim, not the rescuer. God is no longer a source of salvation or justice, but a symbol of abandonment, either complicit or powerless. This motion challenges the cultural assumption that God protects the innocent, particularly children. In Jewish tradition, children are regarded as holy or pure, worthy of divine protection. The death of a child signifies not just a loss of life, but the death of covenant, promise, and trust. Wiesel's choice to embed This reflection, in internal monologue rather than external narrative, forces the audience to sit with the rawness of that emotional fracture. Through minimalist language and restraint, Wiesel positions the audience to not simply witness suffering, but to question the theological frameworks they bring to it. The Pipel becomes a symbol of violated innocence and murdered faith, and in doing so, marks the spiritual heart of the memoir's moral collapse. Our second question: how does Wiesel portray the emotional consequences of survival? What moral compromises do we see, and how are they framed? Wiesel presents survival in Night not as triumph, but as moral erosion. One of the most revealing moments occurs when Eliezer watches his father being beaten and confesses, "If I felt anger at that moment, it was not directed at the capo, but at my father." This admission is deeply uncomfortable, as it contradicts both familial loyalty and cultural reverence for family and parents, especially within Jewish tradition. Survival, Wiesel shows, often comes at the cost of conscience. The emotional consequences are portrayed through internal fragmentation. Eliezer no longer recognizes his own reactions. He's becoming passive, emotionally distant, focused entirely on persevering his own life. These compromises are not sensationalized. They are revealed through quiet, matter-of-fact tone, which makes them all the more chilling. Wiesel does not frame these moments as failures, but as symptoms of the prolonged trauma and systemic degradation. The audience is invited not to judge, but to understand the psychological toll of extreme suffering. Survival becomes morally ambiguous. While others die with honor, those who survive often do so with guilt. Through this framing, Wiesel destabilizes heroic narratives and instead insists on a more honest and ethical, complex understanding of endurance. Our third question: what role do hunger and physical suffering play in shaping identity within this section? In this section, hunger is not just a physical condition, it becomes a defining aspect of identity. Eliezer says, "I was nothing but a body, perhaps even less, a famished stomach." This metaphor collapses his entire being into a single need, reflecting how starvation reduces people to primal instincts. The human body is no longer sacred or whole, it is a vessel for suffering. Wiesel uses stripped back syntax and minimalist prose to mirror the reduction of the self. Identity is no longer tied to language, culture, or memory, but to appetite. The sacred rhythms of Jewish life, once centered around prayer, study, family, and celebration, are now replaced with the rhythms of soup cauldrons, bread rations, and the gnawing wait for the next meal. This representation challenges the reader's understanding of what it means to be human. Wiesel presents a world in which personhood is not protected by belief or moral worth, but instead is dismantled by systemic starvation. The audience is positioned to see hunger not just as a symptom of cruelty, but a tool of the spiritual and psychological annihilation. Our fourth question: how are authority and power represented among the prisoners themselves, and what values are inverted or exploited? Wiesel shows that power in the camps is not reserved for Nazis alone. It also manifests among the prisoners, particularly through figures like Idek and Franek, who serve as capos and foremen. Their behavior is often marked by violence, exploitation, and hypocrisy. Franek, for example, uses Eliezer's love for his father as leverage to obtain his gold crown. Idek, in moments of inexplicable rage, beats both Eliezer and his father. These moments demonstrate how minor authority breeds moral decay. Cultural values such as compassion, justice, and solidarity, those which are essential within Jewish tradition, are turned upside down. Instead of honoring the elderly, Frank mocks and abuses Eliezer's father. Instead of community, the camps foster self interest and cruelty. Wiesel does not excuse this behavior, but he contextualizes it. The system rewards betrayal and punishes integrity. Those who hold power are often coerced into replicating the violence inflicted upon them. Through this, Wiesel explores how oppression fractures not only victims, but their relationships with each other. The audience is asked to reflect on how power dynamics are reshaped by fear, and how even the persecuted can become enforcers of pain when survival is at stake. Our last question is, how do moments of kindness, like the French girl's words, function within the narrative? What do they tell us about the human connection under oppression? The French girl's whispered words, bite your lips, clench your teeth, and wait, stand out as a profound act of quiet resistance. Her tenderness after Eliezer is beaten is not just comforting, it's defiant. In a world where language, touch, and care are dangerous, her actions become this form of human reclamation. She risks exposure by revealing her identity as a Jew and by offering kindness to a fellow prisoner. This moment functions as a counterpoint to the brutality elsewhere within this section. It shows that human connection can survive, even under erasure. The girl's voice, soft but unwavering, contrasts with the shouted orders, the beatings, and the hangings. Wiesel's inclusion of her later encounter in Paris ties memory to meaning. It suggests that while suffering may be silenced, it does not erase. These rare glimpses of compassion remind the reader that the Nazis failed to eliminate dignity entirely. Wiesel positions these gestures not as sentimentality, but as evidence of moral resilience. The audience is invited to see kindness not as a weakness, but as resistance, proof that the self can still reach for others, even when the system insists it must not. Elie Wiesel does not ask us to fix the past. He asks us to remember it, and in doing so, to guard ourselves against forgetting the cost of silence, complicity, and the quiet collapse of human dignity. I hope you will join me next time as we enter into Section 5, where selection becomes routine and hope flickers amid some exhaustion. Until then, keep reading, keep reflecting, and keep remembering. I'm Mr. Rose, and this is a rose within the thorns.